Welcome to Adaptation, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is...
Patrick.
Patrick, yes. I think we're
Yes, we're
both
going formal.
hosts at this
Yeah,
point.
we're gonna go formal.
Yeah,
No,
formal.
you're the host, man. It's your show.
Thomas, so it's our show.
Yeah, no,
We
I mean,
plan it together.
I'm not really planning any of this. You're
Well, it's...
you form the framework. I just live in the house.
Yes. So, yes, fair enough. So, Thomas and Patrick, the formal podcast hosts of this episode of King Lear. And I think I'd start today with some Tom Teaches Theater to talk about the first real, established theatrical family, the Burbages. And the Burbages, the real interesting people. What I know about them was they're involved in a tremendous amount of legal cases throughout their lives. And so there's actually a decent amount of information on them. The head of the Burbage family was James Burbage, who is...
So maybe there were other theater families. They just weren't quite so litigious.
Yeah, or they were getting sued or whatnot, but really they were like the innovators in terms of what we think of theater as a place you go to and you sit in seats and you pay a fee and then you see plays, and some of the plays are old and some of the plays are new. This is a thing they really came up with it. And James Burbage was the guy. He was the man. He was born sometime in the 1530s. And he appears to have been apprenticed as a joiner, which is basically a woodsmith, a person who was a carpenter. And he apparently was pretty good at it. And he was kind of disappeared for a while, but we know by the 1570s he was employed by Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, sometimes lover of Elizabeth I. And Leicester had employed a group of actors as early as the 1550s. And we know that, actually, we know about him before the 1570s because we actually have a letter of with Burbage on it from 1559 requesting that he get permission to perform, etc. What happened was something called the Vagabond Acts were passed in 1572, which said actors needed royal patrons in order to keep acting, otherwise they'd be arrested and maimed, etc. And Leicester's men, which existed already, had a huge competitive advantage. And Burbage was with them. And we know this because there was a problem in London at the time, and Burbage wrote a letter asking Leicester to be hired as a household servant, because if he was, then the actors could go in and out of London without getting special permission or something like that. There was a bunch of weird rules, etc., going on. And so he had started to develop theater with them. Later, the Earl of Sussex was denied by the Lord Mayor of London to have his actors perform in that city. And that's when Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, issued the first royal patent for actors in 1574, which headed a troupe headed by 5 actors, the first of whom was James Burbage, and this allowed them to perform wherever they wished by royal decree. And you should know that there's a tension going on at this time between the royals and the people who ran London, like the Lord Mayor of London. They disagreed. The Lord Mayor was, and the apprentice companies and whatnot, they were probably a little more what we would call puritanical. They did not like actors. They did not like theater. They thought it was very bad for public morale. And the royals really liked theater and patronized it. And so him, Dudley, issuing this patent was a sort of salvo in that fight. And that's where we have more evidence of Burbage's participation. The company also had big successes playing for Elizabeth I at Kenilworth Castle. They played there in 1566, 72, and 75. And by the way, this castle is only 12 miles away from Stratford upon Avon. And so a lot of people went to these things, not just the royals. And it is reasonable to think that a young Shakespeare could have gone to one of these performances. There's a very big 1575 production of a play called The Delivery of the Lady of the Lake. And it's perfectly reasonable that a teenage Shakespeare went there. Eventually, Burbage married Ellen Brain of another big family, the Brain family. John Brain, her brother,
That was
was
smart. That was a smart move.
getting married. Ah,
Good God, man.
um,
Moving on.
moving on, yeah. Um, to John, and he was a grocer, and what ended up
Maybe
happening
he should have
was,
just taken a shower. All right, I'll stop. Okay, I'll stop. So this
anyway.
grocer. Anyway,
Oh,
just
okay, there we go.
yeah.
Pat will make and explain the jokes for
Okay, I
this
will stop. I will
dull
stop.
host. No,
Okay, so
make all. Yeah.
he's not grocer. He was yeah. Okay,
He's
fine.
yeah. But so Burbage eventually, so Burbage got his wife pregnant, which is something that happens, and had a daughter, and he thought, seemed to think, oh crap, I'm not making that much money. So he worked with an investor named Gills Allen, who I think, I couldn't confirm this, but I think is related to the future actor Edward Allen, who was a big competitor of the Burbages. And they signed a lease for an mostly old and abandoned area outside of London, known as a former priory grounds. The only thing there was a bar; everything else was abandoned. And they got it, and Alan gave him this space for £14 a year. However, the letter of the law said you could not play outdoors. You couldn't do a play outdoors. So Burbage built a stage that was indoors, and by building around the stage, and he built this roundhouse for himself. And he kind of ran out of money doing this, but eventually he got his brother-in-law to invest and complete the building, and they called it the theater, which is where we get the term for the theater. And why we have the first really like stable indoor theater was just to avoid the law. So apparently this faced competition from the Curtain, another theater that opened in 1577. It was about 200 yards away from the theater and closer to London. And so for a while, scholars were confused as to who opened the curtain and why it must have been so frustrating. However, recent research has come out that the person who built it was somebody named Henry Lanman, who was a good friend of Burbage, and probably it was Lanman and Burbage who pooled their money together and used the curtain to do easier plays to tempt more people into spending money on plays and eventually get those people to go to the theater. And so apparently the curtain and the theater were owned by the same people, just producing different types of products in each building, which is a very entrepreneurial way
I'll
to.
say that's wicked smart.
That's yeah,
That's
yeah.
pretty good.
That's like the contemporary. We don't have proof of this, but that's the contemporary belief now. Now that we know that that Landman actually did build this thing, and he was very close with Burbage. However, a bunch of plague scares pushed Burbage into debt. Furthermore, he had a falling out with his brother-in-law, who was contracted to pay for repairs as part of his obligation. However, he stopped paying for anything and simply demanded profits. Eventually, he would die. His widow would start suing the start suing. Actually, his widow would start suing Burbage, and we have a few accounts of his son Richard Burbage beating off the people who were suing them with a broomstick. That was written down.
That was a classy time.
Yeah, it was. Things kind of got worse. Queen Elizabeth's men came into existence in around 1583. That became a big kind of competition and a problem. Eventually, Leicester, the Earl of Leicester, Robert Dudley, died in 1588, and a lot of the actors moved on to other companies. In 1594, the Lord Chamberlain's men got exclusive rights to play in the City of London. And the Queen selected those people. She selected a company of 12, and apparently Burbage was not selected amongst the 12. And so this became kind of a problem. There was a falling out with his brother-in-law. Eventually, this is the story, we talked about this previously, of them moving the theater
Yeah, they're
across
moving it.
and
Yeah.
then building the Globe. And so that's what they did. A little before then, though, Burbage in 1596 purchased the Blackfriars property, which had been a Dominican priory that had been divested by Henry VIII during that period when the Anglican Revolution in England. And so it was open for grabs. Burbage bought it. He tried to change it into the world's first completely indoor theater, so no open roof or anything like that. However, after he purchased it and refabbed it, the citizens of London got a petition together banning the theater playing in that area, and he could never open it. And
These
Burbage,
people are the worst.
yeah,
They're the
because this is in
worst.
London. Blackfriars is actually in London. It's not.
Yeah, I've been there. I mean,
Yeah, oh
yeah.
yeah, these people suck. And Burbage ended up dying in 1597. Supposedly, the stress of dealing with them, it just killed him. But he had two sons, one who's more famous than the other, and they seem to like take his talents and split them between them. Cuthbert, the eldest, was a who did the finances. He handled the legal disputes between the widow and his father's partner. He found a new place for the Lord Chamberlain's men to perform. He's the one who actually kind of organized the escape of the theater into the globe. He leased the Blackfriars Theatre to a man named Henry Evans, who performed with children, which apparently the people of London were fine with if children performed. And so he actually was able to make money out of the Blackfriars Theatre, even though he himself couldn't perform. So he also created the share system where Cuthbert and his younger brother Richard, had half the shares. The rest were divided amongst five actors, one of whom was Shakespeare. And he lived until 1636. He kept a huge record, which is where I got a lot of this information, and he died apparently happy and wealthy. And then there's Richard. Richard was born
Yeah, I was
in
gonna say Richard's the one I've heard of.
Richard Burbage. He was born in 1568. He became involved in the theater as a child. He was raised in it. He worked for a bunch of different companies. He started, according to his brother Cuthbert, said he started acting. His first performances were in 1588. When he started acting initially for the Admiral's men, and then he moved to the Lord Chamberlain's men in 1592, the Earl of Pembroke's men in 1593. He eventually, with his brother, regained the Blackfriars Theatre in 1608. After this is now a change of royalty that James is in. And the children there offended the king with a play, and then they offended the French king with another play. And so they were kicked out, and Burbage was able to actually purchase the thing and start a profitable theater company there. And Burbage was an amazingly successful actor. He's sort of the first actor who, by all accounts, developed realism. Nobody knew it was realism, but he seemed to try and internalize things, so people thought it seemed like he wasn't acting. That's often what people said about him. He played Othello. Hamlet, there's a theory that Hamlet was written specifically for Burbage in mind, because it might have been revised around the time Burbage's father died, and this was Shakespeare's kind of thing he did for Burbage. That's a theory. It's a little flaky, I think, but the timelines kind of line up. He was also a successful artist. The Chandos portrait of Shakespeare, which is the real famous portrait of Shakespeare, for a while it was believed that was his painting. We can't prove it, but that's still a live theory. We do have a painting of Burbage by Burbage that exists, so you could see his artistic skills. He continued to work for the Lord Chamberlain's men, worked there until his death in 1619. Burbage died on the 13th of March, less than 2 weeks after the Queen of England, Queen Anne, had died. And London, the people of London, seemed far more
When
interested
did
in mourning.
James die?
1625.
Oh, so different. Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so this Queen Anne of Denmark was
Yes.
the queen. He
Got it.
died. He died 6 years later.
Okay.
There's a big problem though, because London apparently was mourning more for Burbage than her, and so people were getting a little upset at at that kind of disparity. So there was a real threat, like this is kind of destabilizing, that people would worry more about this actor than the Queen of England. Um, and yeah, his funeral was really well attended in a way that Shakespeare's wasn't. Shakespeare had kind of disappeared when he left London in 1612. Apparently he would show up. There's actually, I found a journal journal entry from Shakespeare's cousin, Thomas Green, who's like, Shakespeare came back today. This is from 1615. I wish he had brought more stuff. He just brought a play for Burbage. So apparently Shakespeare would show up occasionally, but apparently Shakespeare did not like London and was perfectly happy to retire. Burbage was not that way. He
As a man who
performed.
moved out of New York City, I sympathize.
Yeah,
Although I do like New York City, but
don't want to live. Yeah, it seems like Shakespeare just had no interest. It's weird because he was also very litigious. He just had no interest in going back in like London after he left or theater. He just would like apparently show up to see his cousin and his best friend Burbage. Um,
it's like working in a sausage factory. You don't eat sausage afterwards again. Like,
but there's one thing I want to leave with. It's kind of a famous anecdote from John Manningham, who was a law student at the Middle Temple and who kept a diary, and we have it. And he's the first person who gave us actually evidence of Twelfth Night because he attended a performance in February of 1602 and wrote about it. But we also have an entry from March 13th of 1602 in which he saw a production of, I believe it was Richard III. It was Richard III. And so what he wrote about was, and it was Burbage who was performing it. And he wrote, there was a citizen grew so fair in liking with him, that's Burbage, that she went from the play, and she appointed him to come that night unto her by the name of Richard III. Shakespeare, overhearing their conclusion, went before and was entertained at this game ere Burbage came. The message being
it's really great.
oh wait, here's the kicker. The message being brought to Burbage, being brought that Richard III was at the door, so that Burbage came to the door of her house, was this: um, William the Conqueror was before Richard III. So
I
that's the
mean,
note he left for Burbage.
that's good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an actual bed trick, essentially. Like
Yeah.
he actually pulled off the bed trick.
Yeah, so they were, yeah, and they were very close. So Burbage's firstborn son was named after Shakespeare too. So it's William Burbage. But
Oh,
yeah,
I
that is
wish
an.
that story is true. And I
I
mean, it
hope
sounds like it
so.
could be, and I really hope it is.
Yeah, it's
Because it's
from.
too good.
Yeah, it's like this guy. He was at the performance of Richard III and overheard that apparently. But I who knows, you know.
The thing that always amazes me is I know this is just like it's 400 years ago, but it still amazes me that like 400 years ago doesn't sound like it's that long. Like it feels like we should just have like there should just be better records. You know what I mean? Like it feels like my gut says 200 years ago we would know it all. Like we probably would have records of like everything that was going on. We would have bill plates, right? 300 years ago we'd have pretty good idea, but still feels like 400 years ago we have about as much knowledge as like 700 years ago.
Yeah, I
You know
don't
what I
know. I
mean?
mean, we have a
It feels
lot of
odd.
I like doing this podcast. I found so many records. Like I have a book. Like I read in preparing for just that little thing. I found a book on the Burbages, and I went through like 130 pages of legal
But it
documents.
just strikes me as odd we don't know. It's like, oh, the first time we ever heard about Twelfth Night was from this dude's law diary.
Yeah.
It
Mm.
seems weird that like no one wrote that down. Like there's no accounting book of that. Like I
Well, there
feel like from
was, but it
I
was
know there
lost.
was, but that's what I
Yeah.
mean, but it's not gone. It's not
Mm.
around. But like 200 years ago, I bet, and actually I wrote a paper in college, which is like, this is a college paper, so it's not that impressive. But it was like a college paper, and I wrote it on one of the first theaters in Boston that opened up. And you could tell every play. You had a whole listing of who was in them. Like, there's a full cast list. Everything's available 200 years ago, no problem. Like, you can easily find that kind of information. And I bet 300 years ago, I bet 1700,
You
we
can,
could find that. Like, we could find it pretty easily, right? But
yeah, starting around
400 years ago,
1660s, you start to have that.
yeah. But it's weird. It's just odd to me that suddenly like 400 years seems to be the cutoff. Like after that, we start losing day to day
Things.
records.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it's paper is really hitting cheapness in like
Yeah,
the
and it's probably that. Yeah,
1630s,
probably that.
and that's what maybe allows people to record because recording things day to day is a privilege. First of all, you need people to be literate and pretty common people at that. And then you need paper to do it on. And it seems like around 1600 is when you pass, in at least in London, pass the 50% point in literacy. And I think around 1620, 1630 is when they start to convert a lot of rags, little French rags, into paper. And so you're like, well, we could do this now. And that's when you have a newsprint thing becomes a big thing. And so now you do have daily records. That's actually where we get a lot of restoration and 18th century stuff is we have the advertisements for all of these plays. And it's and actually a lot of when I was researching illegal theater in during the Protectorate and during the wars, a lot of the illegal theater I learned about because I would read newspapers and it'd be like, these people got arrested today for performing blah blah blah, and it would be
Yeah.
it would be a thing on like a Middleton play, and a bunch of people got arrested, and this actor got arrested, and his costume got confiscated. And it seems like newspapers were the point where like day-to-day stuff was written
Got started
down.
getting recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other side of it too is that I don't these people probably did not appreciate that they were inventing a
Well,
art
no, of course not.
form.
No, of
Yeah,
course not.
that
Um,
this is like this strike. The more I read about this, this strikes me as like a bunch of like entrepreneurs inventing
yeah.
things in their garage, which probably affect. I mean, not a garage, but effectively what's happening. And I think there's just this kind of idea of, oh, there seems to be this constant idea of, oh crap, somebody's suing me. Oh crap, this play was illegal for X reason. Oh crap, the Lord Mayor is trying to stop. There just seems to be constant fighting with the environment in order to make this business work. That seems to be the attitude is like, how do we make this business work? And it just doesn't seem like anybody thought this was going to be precious.
No, I agree. I don't think anyone thought it was going to be worth preserving until you get to the folio. I think by the time you get to the folio, they sort of realized
I think a few
that it
people,
was worth collecting.
yeah, well, the actors who made the folio did,
Yeah,
obviously because they made the folio
because
and
they
to a great
made the
expense.
folio.
Yeah,
And I
and
don't know whether, it's like I always love going back to like the Greek theater. The fact that the number of plays we have from ancient Greek theater is an incredibly small number, and most of them are somewhat random that we actually have. I think I've told you my favorite thing with Euripides is we think that like Euripides, we have more of Euripides plays than Aeschylus and Sophocles combined, and it seems like probably we have a sort of random collection of Euripides because a bunch of them are in alphabetical order. So the assumption is like we must someone at some point say had a complete set of Euripides and like one or two scrolls from it survived. And so we got a alphabetical set. And that's it. It's totally and utterly random. And even a lot of the, of Aeschylus, apparently like Agamemnon and Eumenides were pretty common. They were apparently fairly common. But Libation Bearers, there's only one copy of it. It's one copy on one scroll that came over sometime in like I think the 13th century. No, probably earlier, probably like 12th century. And that's it. We got one copy of that one play, and otherwise we wouldn't have a full trilogy. So there is this sort of sense. I don't know whether they kind of sense like if no one writes this down now in a folio, it's gone. And whether they got that or not, I don't know, but I guess we're glad they
there was,
did.
yeah, there seems to be a little bit of, there seems to be a division between people who understood that you should preserve things for posterity. There is a scholar at Cambridge in Shakespeare's day who talked about Shakespeare as being a new Seneca. He said he's both Plautus and Seneca. He's that good. And so there was this kind of critical appreciation of this stuff is for the ages. And Ben Jonson's another one. Ben Jonson worked hard to preserve everything he wrote and at his expense published it. And so I think people like that professor and Ben Jonson did have an appreciation of this stuff can pass away if we don't do something to save it. And then there seems to be people like the Burbages and Shakespeare who were like, when it's making money, it's good. When it's not making money, I don't care.
Don't care.
I'm gonna be sleeping with ladies and enjoying myself because my wife is very far away and I don't like her very much. That's
What was her name? What was Shakespeare's wife's name?
that Anne Hathaway.
Anne
Anne
Hathaway. Yeah.
Hathaway Shakespeare, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, he did.
Hmm.
Yeah, poor Anne.
Well, on to Lear.
On to
The last, this is
Lee.
like our last. I mean, I think we're doing Tempest, and then we'll finish with Timon. But I think
Hmm.
this is our last like real big one, right?
Yeah, Tempest is a good play.
Tempest is a big one, but I mean,
Timon is sort of a joke we're doing,
Timon is a joke we're doing.
but
But I mean, I really like Tempest, and Tempest is a good one to end on. But this is our last like, you know,
this is the last great
yeah.
tragedy we're doing. Um,
If we
and
lost Tempest forever, it would be sad, but it wouldn't be a lot. It wouldn't be like horrible. We lose Lear, I think something's really bad.
yeah, something's
We
bad. And
lose
it,
something great.
I think it was popular then too, because this is one of the plays where we have both a folio and a quarto version. So apparently it was very popular, and also starred Richard Burbage of all people, even though he was like 40 when he did it or something. But yeah, whatever. But yeah, this is. I think Hamlet is my favorite just because I really love the character of Hamlet.
Yeah, we talked about this, I think, before. I
Yeah.
still think Lear is my favorite, and listening to them now, I still think Lear is my favorite. But I get Hamlet more having had our discussion. But this is such a good play.
So why is it your favorite?
I mean, it might just be the pathos of it. I mean, I think it's the one, if we're gonna look at like Shakespeare's plays, it's like Julius Caesar is the one that sort of is like, that's the easiest to adapt politically. Like everyone can find a political tie to it in today's day and age. But I think Lear is the one that if you're trying to find a tie to modernity and trying to find something where you can relate to it, Lear just still works. Nothing will ever take Lear away because everyone has aged parents and everybody's going to age and everybody worries about falling into obscurity and infirmity and sort of just unimportance. And so I think it always works. It will always hit a nail pretty close on the head. Hamlet I like, but it's not as if I'm ever like, I understand Hamlet's position on this matter. I see where he's coming from. You know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
no one does that really with Macbeth. Othello strikes me as just from Mars. But so for the other ones, they never quite have the personal touch. Like I can obviously find things that are really great in them, and there's lots of really beautiful things in them. Like we were talking about the Macbeth one and the speech of where his I think you know uh Sound and Fury speech is quite powerful, but it and those are more just sort of like existential moments. Lear just feels like, yeah, a lot of this is just day to day applicable. Like there is a strong sense of dealing with an aged parent and dealing with feelings of inadequacy are just a constant in life. And so it has the most direct resonance. And it's just beautiful. It's just so many good speeches. Like if it didn't have that, whatever, that's a sitcom or whatever. But it's just so many good speeches, so much beauty, and I think it just has the most direct ties. It has the most direct wiring to to all life. I don't think modern life, all life.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree. I think Hamlet is deeper than Hamlet goes. That character goes in places we can't go,
Yeah,
and so there's
Hamlet has
something.
a lot more to say about a lot of things,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
And really smart things to say about a lot of things.
mhm. But I think you're right. I agree. Lear was always the play that had the most pathos for me. I think it's the
Yeah.
play when it's done well, is the most upsetting in a way that even Othello doesn't really
Othello, I
isn't.
still think is from Mars. Like
Yeah.
I still have a lot of difficulty with his responses to things.
Yeah, he goes off the rails, but whatever. Yeah, Lear is, I think it's the most pathos inducing. It's the saddest one for me. And
Yeah.
it's also in watching it and rereading it and then rewatching it, it is also a great balance between a sort of um, almost kind of surrealist feel in
Yep.
those middle acts when they're kind of just in the middle of nowhere and sort of the woods
It's a
of
very Waiting
England.
for Godot quite kind of
It
feel.
does have that feel of Waiting for Godot. Yeah, it
Yep.
makes like this is the thing with Shakespeare. Shakespeare makes every other play after him seem unoriginal. Because when you go back to Shakespeare in depth, you're like, oh, this seems to be in Shakespeare before
This was
before it
already
was
there, right?
back in it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that's it. The first production I ever saw of Lear, and it was really good, was actually starring Alvin Epstein, who was in the first Waiting for Godot. He was in the original production of Waiting for Godot, or I think English production of Waiting for Godot. He played Lucky. Um, and it was really good. He did the like it was really sad. He did the like the recognition scene, the I know your face scene, and he did it very much like the thing he was clearly trying to evoke was like a Alzheimer's patient in a nursing home. And it was just that sort of, and having been through those kind of things where you see patients in a nursing home who just have no idea who you are and they should, and it's just like it's really hard, and he just nailed it. It absolutely felt like that, and that's part of the reason why I'm like everything in that, even something as simple as that, like that recognition scene, just the I know your face. They're brutal. They're absolutely brutal. And yeah, the fact that this was coming from someone who is in Waiting for Godot, it has that feeling of just this total the landscape and just the way there's the absolute desolation of them is so good.
yes, the world opens up and it swallows them or leaves them in this kind of muddy middle ground where people just convert into madness. And you get the sense with Edgar, who becomes Mad Tom. And we know that Edgar is putting this on in order to avoid getting captured and killed. But there's a kind of sense of Edgar's really good at this. Is Edgar,
He's a little
he's
too
too good
good
at
at
this. Is this
this.
happening to him? Like, is he
I think it
dissolving
is. I
into
think
this? And
there's
I
a
think it
sense that
is,
he's,
in a
yeah.
sense that it's happening to Lear and it's also happening to the fool, who's sort of at first the fool is the wisest person in the room. He's able to tell Lear, you should have been wise before you became old, right? He's able to give these kind of this
I
wisdom
thought this
as
one with the eggs, and he's like, there would be two crowns, and there
oh
would be, yeah, like,
yeah. But when he gets to that kind of desert mud landscape or something, even the fool seems like childish and demented. He loses his intelligence. And yet bits of smart come out of all three of them in that scene. So it's not gone. It's just in the wind and it possesses them now and then. And they're sort of suddenly aware of their circumstance, and Lear is suddenly aware of his culpability in the fact that he is in this circumstance, which he is to a degree. And it's so not only heartbreaking, and I think a lot of those scenes that are so heartbreaking are later when he's with Cordelia, obviously. When he holds the feather in front of her
feather, yeah.
mouth, that really hurts. That makes me upset when I read it. Never mind seeing it. Um, but the scenes in the middle are like I don't really know what to make of them. And in the films we watched, especially in the Soviet film, they do great stuff in it because it becomes a surrealist
It's a
landscape.
filmmaker's, yeah, it's a filmmaker's dream.
Yeah.
Basically it's like, okay, take a couple characters, drop them into a hellscape of no bounds with just wind and rain and desolation. Like make that image, and you can do a lot. Like it's a filmmaker's dream, I think, to do that kind of thing. It's very Sartrean, this sort of just empty space person yelling into the void. Like it's very it's existential, and it really works. It's good.
Yeah, it is. And I want to talk a little bit also about the beginning, about that opening and the, decisions Lear makes and everything like that. And we were talking about this off air, obviously texting, about the what's going on in that beginning scene. And reading it now, or rereading it and rewatching it also, I think we talked about this, like it's the the sisters, Regan and Goneril, who strip him of his knights are not entirely in the wrong for stripping him of his knights. And you made the point, like, and Cordelia is not entirely in the right for not flattering him.
I don't. Yeah, so let's start with that.
Sure.
I don't I get it. It always reminds me there's a great section in Augustine, St. Augustine in the Confessions, where he talks about how Augustine was originally a professor of rhetoric. That was what he did. He made flowery speeches to flatter people, essentially. And he talks about how he became concerned that he was essentially lying. And that my favorite is he would tell it. I love it. He would tell his students that when they went into court, they could use their rhetorical skills to lie to get guilty people off, to get guilty people declared innocent, but they should never use the rhetorical skills to get innocent people declared guilty. That was how he kind of justified to himself
Mhm.
that it was okay to lie using rhetorical skills. So he talks about how he became very concerned, though, anytime he heard someone using rhetorical skills he became worried that well they must be lying that if you're using rhetoric and you're using sort of flowery language or skills this kind of stuff you must be a flatterer you must be doing these kind of things and then he meets Ambrose later and he realizes no it's okay to use rhetoric it's okay you don't have to just put everything in brutal plain tones it's okay to speak nicely and politely and with grace and style as long as what you're saying is true. You don't have to just brutalize it and layer it down. And even then, it reminds me of Simon Schama talks about this in Citizens that a number of times there was this sense that if they were rhetoricians, they were brilliant rhetoricians, but there was a sense that if you were rude and mean and blunt, it meant that you were honest, and that's just not true. And there's this sense with Cordelia that she sort of has that idea that to speak just nicely and to tell people pleasant things is to lie, is to flatter in this sort of sense. And I'm like, she kind of gets it when she says, "Why do my?" She asks a rhetorical question. This is a rhetorical device. Why do my sisters have husbands if they love you so much? And she almost gets it, but she just can't carry that further. Like she could be honest and be flowery. So I've never understood just be a little nicer. Again, and I get it. It's sort of like they're clearly lying. The sisters are lying and are flattering and saying fake things. But why can't therefore she say nice things? I guess it's implied that she's so honest, the I can't heave my heart into my mouth kind of thing, but I just don't, I don't get it. I don't buy it. I think it's a sense of rhetoric is bad and you shouldn't trust it, but I feel like, no, it's a failure of you. You should put a little more effort into expressing, given this is from Shakespeare. Like,
That's
put a
fairly
little
clear.
more effort into expressing yourself. Like, I think she should. So I don't give her total carte blanche. She should put a little more effort into her speech.
Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting interpretation because it a lot because until these are the other sisters. So I think it is Goneril who kicks him out of the castle. Though I get Goneril and
This
Regan
is this is
confused.
a Rosencrantz and
Maybe
Guildenstern.
yeah, I
It's a
think
Rose.
maybe
This is a
Regan
Rosencrantz and
kicks him
Guildenstern
out.
thing.
Um,
Neither of them. The only difference is one of them has a husband. Their differences are based on their husbands. One of them
yeah,
has a husband who is loyal, and one of them has a husband who is not.
yeah.
That's their differences.
I
The two of them are not
different. I
differentiated.
think it's Regan who kicks him out, who kicks Lear out, and this is where you get him wandering in the heath or what have you. But until that point, their problems with Lear are pretty reasonable. He is
The
a
problems with Lear are reasonable if he's not the king.
well, this is, and I think this is the problem with Lear, and
Yeah,
and this, I
this is
guess
this is where
we're
the
guess we're
problem
moving
enters.
off of
Yeah.
the Cordelia interpretation, which
No, I think the
I
Cordelia thing,
I
I don't
really
get
like.
it.
I like that. I think that that makes a lot of sense. That she just, if she could just, express her affection for, because she has no problem expressing that later in the play when
No,
they're captured and brought
No,
together.
she's perfectly fine with it.
It just seems like a kind of failure, but the play doesn't really point it out as a failure. It just seems like logically speaking, yeah, it's she's not able to do what he needs. Um,
And I think that if you were to just I don't want to belabor this point, but it's like I think the play is making the case that Lear needs it, and maybe this is she knows it. Like, he needs to not be flattered because he just keeps getting, he's spoiled. He doesn't know himself. I don't remember which one says he's never known himself. One of the characters says it at some point. Is it Kent? Someone says it. He's never really known himself, which is very fair. He hasn't. So she's trying to do that, but this is the worst worst time to teach that lesson. If you really want your father to learn himself better, then, to learn who he is better, then get a third of the kingdom, have him live with you, which is clearly his plan, and teach him then.
don't do
don't
it publicly.
don't do it publicly, and don't do it at a position where you're going to then force your father to be dependent on the two sisters who hate him. It's a totally batty decision on her part.
Yeah.
And I think that the play, at least in its internal logic, is trying to go with that, but it doesn't work. So part of me does blame Cordelia a bit for the situation.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think she's to blame, and I think that obviously Lear is to blame, and the play
Yeah,
says he's to blame.
and he is.
And he is, and I think it's the problem I think Lear has is that he wants to still have all the privileges of being king, riding around with 50 knights and there's a
100,
whole
100.
100 knights, then 50, and then less and less, but fewer and fewer rather. And he wants to be treated as a guest. That's a big thing in this play, is how you treat your guests. And as king, you are welcome or supposedly welcome everywhere. That's the standard. And when the servant doesn't welcome him or people are too ill to greet him, this is a big problem. But his knights are also a difficult thing.
They're a problem.
They're a
Yeah.
problem. They are a legitimate problem. Like, why are we housing these people? They are rambunctious. They're damaging. And normally this is checked by the fact that, okay, he's the king. He gets to do this. He gets to be frivolous. Right? That's what he talks about in it, is that our basest beggars are in their poorest things superfluous. Right? It's like you need to be superfluous. To be human is to need to do something that is not necessary. And for him, it's this kind of these nights and this this sort of wastefulness. The problem is he's king of England, and it's really really hard to be superfluous and be wasteful when you're number one king of England, and number two, you've decided you no longer want to be responsible for England.
Well, that's
Right?
the thing, is it is easy to do when you're king of England. It's much more difficult to do it when you're not. You've given up everything.
Yeah, but still
You
want to
have,
be treated
but you still
as
want to
king
be
of England.
treated as if you are. This is you cannot have power without some backing. And he gave up the backing because the backing is hard, and but he still wants everything else that goes with it. And they're making very clear to him, you don't get that. That's not a game you can play.
Yeah. And but I still like the observation that he makes about no, you need to be wasteful as like to be a human is to be wasteful. You need to waste stuff, and I think the play is utterly sympathetic with him in that sense. Is that he doesn't understand scale. He's screwed up the scale by which he can be wasteful because he doesn't understand
He
that
he
no
should
one cares
he
about
should
his
be
position.
quiet. He should be quiet and have a few. If he had 5 nights and just kind of wandered around and made a little bit of a,
Probably no one
maybe
would
like, oh
care.
my God, Lear's over there and he's with his 5 drunken knights. No one would care. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, that it's scale. And that's, if he had five nights, no one would be batting an eye. 100 nights who probably have squires and prostitutes that are going with them and this kind of thing. It's like, yeah, dude, you're just locusts. Like, you can't do this. We can't support you on this, because you don't have anything to support yourself. Yeah, there's a sense in which this particular situation is Lear's fault. Now, I don't know if the play I think is kind of giving that. I don't think that that aspect is gone, but I do think the play is also not saying that Goneril or Regan are in any way in the right. There's almost this idea that it doesn't matter that he's being wasteful and that these are a plague of locusts. You have to welcome them because it's your father. Like you just don't have a choice. If you've ever I was just reading Pearl Buck's Good Earth. Have you read that?
I have not, no.
In Pearl Buck's Good Earth, the main character, his uncle is a locust. His uncle shows up with his family, and they just eat everything, and they stay, and they're horrible. And at one point, the son tries to sort of embarrass the uncle, and the uncle basically says, "If you ever say anything, I will go into the town and I will denounce you as a person that tried to send his father's brother out." And basically the guy says, okay, fine, I'll let you do whatever you want. Because he's like, I can't accept that scandal. Like it's too much to be known as someone who insulted an elder, known as somebody who insulted my father's brother. I can't do it. Like that is not an option. Even as the wealthiest person around, I cannot have that. And I think that's a little bit of the attitude this thing is going with is they're setting Lear up as being incredibly demanding, overly demanding, as they say, like unreasonable. But reason not the need. It doesn't matter. You don't get to call it into question. I still, as your father, get this right, but he lacks all power to do it. So it's sort of a question of family rights versus power. He thinks family rights, because he's the father, he should get to do what he wants, but he has no power. He has literally none. And that ain't gonna win in this world. It's a cruel world now.
It's not going to win, but you're still sympathetic to him, and
Yeah, of
and they're
course you
still
are.
evil. Yeah, I mean, it's
And
an
they're still
impossible
evil.
situation. Even if they weren't evil, I think it's still an impossible situation where you
This
have
is a
people.
Sophoclean play.
Yeah,
This is Sophoclean. No matter what they choose, it's wrong.
yeah, that's a good point.
Or so,
There's
I
no
suppose
good
if
choice.
it's Aeschylus does that more. Aeschylus has no matter what you choose, you're wrong. Sophocles usually has if you just compromised, you'd be fine. Aeschylus is usually no matter what you choose, you're wrong. You're screwed. You can't do anything. And I think they're all screwed. No one can make a right choice after Lear sets up the bad situation. Lear makes the initial wrong choice. He sets up the now, no matter what anybody does, it's going to blow up.
Yeah, they're done. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And so the growth of Lear is just sort of live completely abandoned of everything. And that's what you're seeing, is seeing a person who kind of adapts to having nothing and being nothing and sort of evolving out of that. It's a
Yeah,
yeah.
they break him down into the sort of literal embryonic
Hmm.
state, and then he has to be reborn
Hmm.
from
With
his sort of broken embryonic state.
yeah. Yeah, he's atomized and then returns to some sort of recognition with his daughter.
There is a sense the film versions do something different because there is a sense, partly at least, the thing that initially gets him out of the storm. What's the thing that gets initially out of the storm? Do you remember?
Doesn't Ken come and take him to the home,
He
right?
won't. He won't go.
Hmm.
It's his concern for the fool.
Oh, okay.
He basically says like, I have to get the fool inside. The fool needs to get inside. So there is this sense that his first moment of return to lucidity, and this is the first embryonic step towards his rebirth, is the recognition of the needs of another. And I think that's the important thing. And so in the Soviet version, they do something really interesting, which is, I don't know if you got this. Like the way I read the Soviet version is there's this sense that the they're still acknowledging the tragedy and sort of the grandiosity, but there's also a sense of this is so trivial because of the suffering of all the people around them. You know, when they go into that hovel and there's like 40 people crammed in there, and they're all look like they're starving, and there's all these starving people wandering around, and when the war is going on, they literally show Edmund like burning just random peasants' houses. There's this sense, which seems very Soviet, that the people are suffering because of this one stupid man, and everybody has to suffer, and there's all this suffering going on around them, and Lear's sort of rehabilitation begins with at least an acknowledgement of the fool's suffering. But even then, even when he meets Tom, he still sees Tom suffering through his own suffering. The like, did you have daughters too? I always love that line.
Yeah.
Did you have daughters too and give them everything? I love that line. Who gives Tom anything? It's just, he can't quite get it, but he's trying to see others suffering. And in the Soviet version, there's just this sense of, why do we care about any of these quote unquote great people suffering when everybody else is suffering? There is an enormous mass of suffering around him, and yet we're focused on this one man, maybe two, if we count Gloucester or these other people, and all the other people are suffering. Olivier does it too, though, but there is this sense that that's how Lear regrows initially. He learns just to try to care for another, and that's his beginning of his sort of growth period.
Do you think in the Soviet version, what recuperates Lear in the Soviet version? I mean, it
Um,
mostly follows the same trajectory.
it
But
exactly
it's,
follows pretty much the
yeah.
same trajectory. I don't know that Lear ever is totally recuperated in the
Mm,
Soviet version. There's a sense that this is the way I kind of read the Soviet version. It's not that he's playing lip service just to get it past the censors, because I
mm,
assume there must have been some of that. I don't know enough about.
mm.
I know a little bit about Soviet, you know, censorship. And this is post this is sort of post Stalinist period, post thaw,
Yeah,
but
this is
it's also post
1972.
post Khrushchev. You know,
Mm,
Khrushchev kind of has the thaw, and you start getting things like Master and Margarita start emerging, but Khrushchev is gone. You know, his failure with the Cuban Missile Crisis kind of knocks him out. So 70s is more open. Some of the things where it's interesting, you can see that it must have been more open. Is Cordelia looks like a 70s pinup, doesn't she?
mm. Yeah,
She just
she's very
has.
pretty.
She's very pretty, but she's very pretty in like Jenny from Forrest Gump pretty,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Like there's a very Western sense to her prettiness, right? The sisters have a very doughty, so
Yeah,
very doughty Russian peasant, sort
and
of
I
like
thought they were the same woman for a while.
that took me a little while to figure them
Yeah,
out. Which again, I think that's a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern kind
same
of thing.
thing. Yeah, yeah, but they're
But there's
very unpleasant looking
yeah,
women.
they're very unpleasant. They're very dowdy. There's just sort of this harshness to them. Cordelia looks like she could be a Bond girl, right?
Yeah,
She has a very conventional prettiness, which strikes me as something. I don't know enough about Soviet culture at the time. Something's leaking through from the West if that's the look they're getting. Um, but I don't think it's just to get it past the censors. But there is a strong sense here that there is an enormous amount of suffering going on around the king, and but there's almost a sense that all of this is where I think there is all of the suffering of these individuals combined sort of matches Lear's individual suffering. And I don't think that would be that's a not a Soviet idea, but I think that's what's going on, that he is so noble, so attuned, so everything else, that his individual suffering just feels more, and therefore it is worth following this guy. It's worth following him, in even though all the other suffering is going on around him, that his suffering is felt, is more keen, that it's worth following him. That's what I think is going on with it. I think that's how it's justifying itself.
which is a traditional means of establishing a tragic hero in Shakespeare's day, is that this person is greater
Yeah,
than
but
everybody else.
but you don't usually show everybody else.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
this is intentionally showing the stoic suffering of everybody else versus Lear's sort of histrionic suffering. And there's a sense though that it's earned. He's earned the suffering that you get to see in comparison to the others.
Mhm. And the casting is very odd because he isn't a particularly heroic looking fellow, and I don't
No,
think.
he's actually looks like the fool. He looks like
Yeah,
you could swap him with the fool at some point. His
yeah,
hair is very it's like Einstein in that stupid photo.
yeah, yeah. It was. I'm trying to find the name of the actor here. Jury Jarvet was the name of the actor, and I think he initially was kind of auditioning for a lesser role, and they just liked the look of him. But he has this, like big ears, and he's very small, and he's just kind of like very thin white
He
hair.
looks like a fool. He looks like a fool.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very odd casting, but he's just he. I mean, he just looks like a decrepit old man. You know, you could kind of see his soul in his eyes, so to speak. And so it's a really odd casting for, and I think cuts against a little bit of what you're talking about with this sort of landscape of the heroic tragic hero against the suffering people, that you get to see them in one thing. To me, when I saw him, he looked, even though you don't see those other people, you never really see their faces. They're sort of mobbed,
Yeah.
right? They all seem like part of the mob, but he seems like he fits in more with them than with the royals until the end when he's all in white. When he's
Interesting.
yeah, when he's all in white, then it's like he stands out from everybody. He even stands out from the other royals. He's sort of resurrected at this point, but he looked kind of like part of that clan. And when you see even like all,
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's an interesting idea. Yeah.
yeah, that and that that kind of checked a sort of kind of Soviet thing of like, in order to be reborn as he is at the end, you have to sort of go back to the people and be with the suffering of the people, and that's why they're there. I had that kind of feel with him. I also thought that's why they cast him, because he is not the person I would cast as Lear if I was doing a traditional production of Lear. Um, that was my reading of him anyway in the Soviet version.
I can see that.
Yeah. We want to move on to the main subplot, Edgar and Edmund? Uh,
Yeah.
I think, as you said before in last week's comments, I really like Edmund. He is my favorite bastard. They do this thing
It's
in.
Shakespeare's best subplot because I think it's Shakespeare's best subplot. Sorry if I'm
Go for
just
it, go for it.
jumping in. I think it's Shakespeare's best subplot because the parallels are there, but they're not just oh, I got it. Like there's the sense and it just where you could make that its own story. Most of Shakespeare's subplots you can't make their own story. They're terrible. No one Fortinbras is not a very good story.
No, Shakespeare's not known for plot, and I think Lear is an exception.
But even just the story, the story of Fortinbras is boring. The story of, what's the Hamlet one? Or I guess we did, it's like, what's the Othello one? Like Roderigo
Yeah,
is the subplot.
Rodrigo also once.
That's a worthless subplot. Many of these they're bad, and they're there to just sort of accentuate or draw out themes from the main one. It wouldn't be a particularly good play, but you could easily make the Edward Gloucester its own play. It would just be a very what do you call it, like Middleton. It'd be like a very Middleton play, right? Like he tended, or Webster didn't, they tended to do. Was it Webster? No. Who was the one who did the Duchess of
Re-
Malfi?
Webster, it's John
It was
Webster.
Webster. So it's very much those kind of plays, like these sort of super violent, bloody kind of things. So, but you could make a tragedy out of that plot. And it works on its own, but it's really good at drawing out the real message of the main one in the opposites of it, how it differs. In the sense that Lear never loses his eyesight, but it's not until he loses everything else that he sees, and Gloucester actually can see, but then it's only when he loses his eyesight that he actually sees. So there's really good parallels, and I especially liked the Olivier version when Gloucester and uh, Lear meet. It really, I feel like you actually see it. Usually the subplots never even really meet. And in this one, they really actually meet and they sort of talk, and it just draws out the points of each one of the other's plays to make sure that the themes of the other ones are there and they're presented and they're done artfully. I think it's his best subplot
Yeah.
in terms of in comparison with the other ones. And it's just a good story.
And it's a good story. And the characters are very rich and have these great arcs of development. You don't see that even with like Iago or something. Iago is fascinating, but he doesn't really go anywhere.
No.
He keeps coming up with reasons why he's going to attack Othello, and then he does it.
And then says, I won't talk anymore. Like
Yeah, that's his ending.
that's his ending arc.
But
I
I mean,
am
like,
done talking.
yeah, with Edgar, it's like I'm going to adopt this sort of like Tom Bombadil. I think was a kind of a classic British type, and he's like, I'm going to adopt this and adopt madness, and he sort of takes it to the nth degree. Like he really does. He does need to go through this sort of crazy rebirth in order to fight his brother, and Edmund has. I love Edmund's thing. Like he's sick of his father putting him down,
Yeah.
and he's going to take revenge. And then this is something they cut out of both of them. They cut it out of the Olivier, and they cut it out of the Soviet version. Is that Edmund decides to do good and try and save Lear and Cordelia when he hears that both of the sisters, Goneril and Regan, liked him, loved him. And there's this line where he says, Edmund was loved. And then he says, some good I mean to do. And they cut that line out of Olivier and out of the Soviet version. The Soviet version, whatever. I mean, they cut plenty
They cut a
because,
lot. Yeah.
yeah. But the Olivier version, they have most of the play. They cut a few lines from like some really good lines from the Fool, but mostly it's
At
mostly
some
just
point we gotta
convenient.
talk the fool. At some point we gotta
Well, then
discuss
we'll
the
go to
fool.
cover the
Yeah.
Fool, yeah. But they cover that line of like Edmund was loved, and it's just it's a great small, but it's really kind of beautiful. It's just he just needs to know he's capable of being loved, and then he can do good. And it's this really interesting thing because it throws Gloucester, who we have all this sympathy for at this point. I mean, he's lost everything, including his eyesight. It throws Gloucester into the blame circle for what's happened to a certain degree, and he
And
doesn't
this is,
just.
maybe this was the point. Like even the Cordelia thing, like we're throwing Cordelia in the blame circle too.
Mhm.
Like, and she's almost always considered blameless. And I'm like, I don't think she is.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's the point. Everybody's here is some blame.
Yeah, it's the less of the tragedies, it's the least like black and white.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
I would agree with
so.
that.
Unless we go down to like Coriolanus or something like that, which doesn't exist because we didn't talk about it on this podcast. But
But even
uh,
Coriolanus, I mean, this is actually partially where I was getting my Cordelia kind of problem from. I mean, that's the main complaint of Coriolanus is like, dude, just suck it up and tell the plebs they're great. Like, just do it. Just do you do it you do it for one day. Just suck it up, tell them you love them, tell them that you'll take care of them, that you're their father, and they will vote then and you'll become the consul. That's all you have to do. Just do that, and you're good. And he's like, I cannot tell a lie. There's sort of like this George Washington-y kind of thing where it's like, dude, just tell the lie. Like, just do it.
make everything better. Yeah.
And no one will suffer if you do this. Everyone expects you to do it. You will be better off for doing it. And no one's gonna remember what you said. Just say it and do it and move on, but he won't do it. And this is where I feel like that's where I sort of get I never had thought it about Cordelia before, but after having read Coriolanus in Shakespeare has like five themes. Having read them all now, he's got like five ideas and he just recycles them. And this is where I'm like, wow, great authors are not that original. They have this, they just keep exploring the same idea. And this is my who hurt you, Shakespeare? Somewhere he has this constant theme of an individual misjudging a person who really loved them, but they misread it and think that the person is disloyal and toss them out. It's everywhere, everywhere in Shakespeare. And I'm like, this has to be, and it never feels like Shakespeare was the victim of it. Or that Shakespeare misjudged somebody else and threw them out. It feels like Shakespeare has to have been loyal to somebody else, and that person was cruel to him. Like that's what it feels like. And so with Coriolanus, there's this very strong sense of he could have resolved his problem. But Cordelia falls down the exact same rabbit hole that Coriolanus arguably falls down. So there's no other one that just sort of has, yeah, this sense of, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, yeah. There isn't
uh,
another play I think that has this kind of except the histories. I think the histories are probably the closest, like Richard II or Henry IV, where you don't have anybody who is purely to blame and anybody who's purely innocent. And I think your interpretation of Cordelia is what what revealed that for me in this play is that yeah, no, she's innocent obviously, but she's should have done different actions, right? Edmund,
Coriolanus is innocent. Coriolanus does nothing wrong, but he's still stupid, and
yeah,
he could have easily fixed his problem.
yeah, and Lear could have easily not created the problem.
Yeah.
His daughter should have treated him better, but he's politically stupid. It seems like Shakespeare has not a lot of tolerance for the politically stupid. That seems to be if you're in a position of power, even if it isn't the most ethical thing ever, or even if it is a lie or a half truth or whatnot, you need to do it to create stability. Shakespeare likes stability. And if you are
Yeah.
introducing political problems that create an unstable empire or unstable country, we can be sympathetic for you as a person. Like we can love Lear and
Like
see his
Richard, yeah, or
dementia,
like
or like
Richard or
Richard the
Lear, yeah, like
Second,
Richard
yeah,
or Lear, Richard the Second,
Richard the
to
Second,
get clear,
yeah. um,
Richard the Second or Lear, yeah.
Yeah, but you are a political idiot, and you are, in some sense, to blame for the situation you're in. And I think
Well,
Edmund,
this is and again, I think you see you're right, and it doesn't matter if it makes you a hypocrite, just do it. You just have to get it done, and you see this in, I think, his greatest regent, who's Henry V. Henry V hangs, is it Bardolph? Which one does he hang? He has
or
one
is
of
it
them hang.
Pistol?
No, Pistol argues for Bardolph, I thought.
Okay, Bardolph sounds good
I
to
think it's
me.
Pistol argues whatever it is. I think
Mhm.
Pistol argues for Bardolph. Um, but so he has one of his old friends hanged. And there is a certain level of hypocrisy in that Henry V is basically saying, I kind of did this stuff in my youth, but you did it now while I'm king, and so I'm going to have you hanged. And the bad king would say, ah, I'm going to forgive him because of yada yada, even if it creates instability and threatens the army and the success of the campaign. But this is a nope, a good king just he accepts his hypocrisy. He accepts the sort of his failures upon himself and moves on and does what needs to get done, even if it makes him a hypocrite, even if it makes him a liar. He has to do these things because that's his role, and it might result in eternal torment for him to some extent, but he has to do it anyway. That's why I always love one last thing I'll just throw out is Dante. He has a number of kings in crawling towards purgatory. They haven't got to the mountain yet, and they're crawling their way towards there. And a number of them are sort of there, and it's like, well, I was a king and I did really bad things, but because I was a king, I get to just slowly crawl my way towards the mountain. There's this sense that it's like I I I wouldn't have been able to do these things as a normal person, but because I was a king, I sort of had to do them, and I still suffer for them. I still have to go through pains for them, but I still get to heaven. I get ultimately forgiven for them, but I still suffer for them ultimately.
Yeah, yeah. It's and if you read De Monarchia, you could see
Yeah.
that
Yes.
reflects Dante's
Yes.
political beliefs as well. Yeah. No, that's
It
a
increasingly
really
reflects
good
my
illusion.
political.
Hmm? I'm sorry.
Increasingly reflects my political beliefs as I read
Yeah.
Demonarchia, but
But yeah, yeah, I think that's a really, really good illusion. Yes, is that there is necessary hypocrisy, and you could see why the Soviets might be interested in such material, or the Japanese in Kurosawa's Ran, which we didn't do, but touches
we
on a
had
little.
so many good Lears. That's the problem with
There's so many
Lear.
good
Lear
mirrors, and
has
I
so
actually
many good
don't like
Lears.
Ran that much. I think it's a little too self-indulgent. There's a lot of silent, like falling over that go. But anyway, anyway, going on. Yeah, you could see that kind of. that kind of energy makes sense in these other kind of cultural contexts. Do we want to talk about the fool?
Yeah, we gotta shut the fool.
Yeah. Yeah, he is a
He's the
biz.
best fool.
He's the
He's the best fool in all
yeah.
of Shakespeare.
Yeah, he's really, really funny. He's really smart, but he needs Lear also. I mean, he needs Lear to like be his parent. And they do have this child-parent relationship. He also, I think, has the biggest arc of development of any of the fools, even more than Jaques. Well, Jaques isn't really a fool, but
He's not quite a fool. Well,
he's not
what's
quite
his
a
name is
fool.
the fool. The other one's the
The
fool.
other one's the fool. Touchstone is the fool.
Touchstone's the fool.
Yeah, but never mind.
But Touchstone has no
Real
development.
arc,
He's just
no.
his development is from horny to fulfilled
Married.
horny to
He
fulfilled
gets married
horny.
and has
Yeah,
some sex. That's
yeah.
Touchstone.
That's Touchstone's
Yeah,
development.
it's a frat bro development. That's what he has. But yeah, with the fool and oh god, he just dies off stage,
Yeah,
right?
you never
And
know. You
you
know.
never know. He just kind of
Well, isn't he
evaporates.
probably the one? The argument I've heard is that isn't he this probably the same person who played Cordelia?
Oh, I haven't heard that argument. No. Oh,
I
that
think
makes
I remember
sense. Yeah.
hearing that because they're
Mhm.
never on stage at the same time. And so the argument is that even when they say, "Where is my fool?" and it says, "Oh, since your mistress went into France, he is always of a." So I think I even read somewhere that there are productions where the fool is Cordelia. Like they're the
That
same,
would be, yeah, that would make a lot of sense.
that
That'd
they're
be
exactly the same
really
person.
interesting to watch. Yeah.
And Lear says they hanged my fool. Like that's his last, when he talks he says about her, they hanged my fool. So there is an apparently I've never seen it done, but apparently there are, I think it was when I was doing the Alvin Ailey one, that he in that one they have like Lear kills the fool in his madness. He like stabs the fool in sort of like when he's with Tom. But the argument I've heard is that the actor, because it was an actor who played Cordelia, would have played the fool, and that and then there are productions where they've actually had it not only just be played by the same actor, but it is Cordelia being his fool.
Oh, that Cordelia is in
Is
disguise
the
as the
fool.
fool? Yeah.
Not
Oh,
just
I
that it's the
see.
same actor. That
Hmm.
Cordelia is the fool.
That doesn't make any sense. How does she pull an
She
army
just
together in France to
well,
invade?
I mean, I'm not saying it makes sense. It just
No, it's just what they're doing.
I think yeah, but I remember reading this at some point that there was there are productions that have done them that Cordelia is the fool and she
Oh,
is with him.
I thought it was
So
just the same
when she
actor.
raises the army is when she
Mm,
disappears. She apparently disappears and go raises the army in France.
France.
But
Okay. Mm,
that she plays the same thing. But
mm,
and there is something where I'm like, okay, actually, if you did that, it's stupid. But
mhm.
we gotta have new justifications to do Shakespeare, and we gotta how many we can put Lear on Mars and put Lear in 1920s Chicago. We might as well
Y-
just do this.
Yeah, I mean those things are just that
They're
doesn't
gimmicks. They're
it
gimmicks.
may it's gimmicks. Yeah, I mean it's interesting to think of the same actor, but they're not the same
Yeah,
person, just to draw those comparisons,
but
right?
yeah,
Because
I think the main argument I've heard is that they were the same actor, and so the fool does just disappear because well
we need Cordelia
we
to
need
come back.
Cordelia on stage
Hmm.
because Cordelia comes on fairly shortly after the fool disappears, and no one would have questioned that at the time because they all could see it was the same actor. But they just they didn't need to explain the character's disappearance. They knew that the character disappeared because a new actor had because the actor had
Yeah,
to disappear. So there was sort of just a acceptance of the fact.
yeah, you just got the convention.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Um, but so they do kill him off, and usually there's different arguments for how he's killed. I think, like, I actually kind of liked the Soviet one. The Soviet one was the worst thing I've ever seen happen to the fool. Do you remember?
I don't right now. What happens to him?
He just sits in a pile, and a guy on a horse just kicks him,
Oh
and
yeah, he doesn't get killed though. That's what. Yeah,
no, he
yeah,
just
because he plays the flute. He plays the like the
yeah, but
shut the
he just
theme.
gets abandoned into
Mhm.
the with the all the rest of the peasants.
Yeah, he just returns to the peasants.
He
Hmm.
just returns to the peasants. There's just this sense of like this really brilliant figure who got to tell the king what to do, until the king, when he was right or wrong, is just kicked off and just falls amongst everybody else. I don't know. I feel like death in some ways was better for the fool than
Better for
that.
him than that.
Better for him because his wit is just dead. There was just this. I thought it was really sad when they just showed the fool just literally just get kicked into a pile. I don't know. I thought that was very tragic for the fool.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I preferred him alive. And yeah, then no, that's an interesting reading that yeah. I he is yeah, he's the best fool because he's really really funny. But he's also, obviously the smartest person or the only person who's able to. And this is the idea of the fool, and I think the modern comedian takes on this role,
Yeah, the
which
truth teller.
is
Yeah, the
yeah,
truth
the
teller.
truth teller, which is you can, and sometimes in plays it's like the mad person can do this as well, which is because you're given this position as fool, you can tell everybody the truth. This is why everybody's angry at Will Smith for slapping the comedian at the
Yeah,
Oscars, because it's like, no, you don't slap the fool.
the fool is
The fool's
immune. Yeah, the fool
exempt
is
because
exempt.
otherwise we don't have anybody to tell us what's going on.
Yeah,
And Lear does threaten to whip him a few times, and he kind of makes the joke of, I tell the truth, I'm whipped. They don't tell the truth, I'm whipped. They say nothing, I'm whipped. Blah blah blah. But that's the idea of the fool.
that's
He's
the
the
joke.
Yeah, that's the
That's
joke is that he can actually speak to the power and nobody else can. And I think the tragedy of him, besides he's killed off stage, which is I find that more brutal, is that his life just kind of goes out without even that kind of consolation, is that his capacity to speak truth seems to diminish as the play goes on. And when Lear resurrects, we don't have a fool anymore, right? He's gone by the point because, as you mentioned, Cordelia comes back, and so it almost seems like Lear, in going through what he goes through, has to sort of absorb the fool. He has to, not his temperament or his humor, but at least,
his perspective.
yes, there you go, his perspective. And that's the kind of function of the fool. He sort of can bleed into Lear, but in order to do so, he just gets reduced more and more into, he's almost like a shivering child the last time we see him. It's a really first of all, it's really strange. Like you read it, it's one thing to read it, and then you watch. I watched the Olivier version first. I read it, then watched.
I watched the Soviet version first. Yeah.
Yeah, but watching the Olivier version first, it's like you
What
when
did
you
they do to him in the Olivier version? Did they kill him off?
he just gets killed off stage. They mention that, yeah. But but it's really strange because he's just suddenly like a man child all of a sudden, and of course
Yeah,
it's
when they're out there,
exacerbated.
it's the like. But this is why I say it's the beginning of Lear's sort of recuperation or his rebirth is when he realizes he has to take care of his fool,
Yeah,
and he says, "Okay, I have to do. I would rather just stand here and shout at the storm and do nothing, but you need to get inside, and so I will take you. I will go with you."
yeah. Yeah, and it seems like almost like he absorbs that into him. Like the wisdom is, the fool gets reduced so that Lear can survive and become, the person he needs to be. Um, yeah, and it's weird though. It's weird. Like you watch the Olivier sections, like the Act Three of the Olivier section, and like John Hurt plays it in the Olivier version, and he might be. I think it's Olivier's. It's a really good performance from Olivier. Of
Yeah,
the side characters, John Hurt is pretty dazzling as the fool. I think he's really, really funny. He is like really physical and really odd, and he plays that kind of childlike thing really, really well. Also, um,
the Russian one also. I did the
yeah, I
reason I
like
like
him
the
too.
Russian.
Yeah,
Well, the reason I like the Russian one in particular is that Russia has a long tradition of the holy fool. Like that's a very big thing in Russian sort of culture. The holy fool is sort of, and again, it's a very similar concept that like the holy fool is the one who just is so, they're often saintly. The idea is because they're so removed and they sort of are touched by God. And so that's I think that the Russian version is very much touching into that cultural uh thing, and I think it really works with him.
Yeah, yeah, it comes from Erasmus, right? The ship of fool idea, which isn't exclusively it's not Russian at all,
I'm sure no
actually.
Russian. I mean, Erasmus it was long before that.
Yeah.
There's the idea of a
Erasmus is talking about it. This idea of like the fool as being like you're saying, this sort of conduit to a religious conduit to God,
yeah.
right? Like it touches it, and you'd see versions of this in different Middle Age courts. Like you see portraits of the king and whatnot, and there would be a little person there. Be like, well, they were a little person; they must have been touched by God, or a person who's
Yeah.
clearly mentally deficient, and it's the same thing. There's this sort of idea of holy foolery that
Well, even my brother has a book. In my brother's upcoming book, he talks about about the fool, the holy fool. And one of his ideas is, I mean, he's sort of, he's on the right track, I think, is this idea that that it's not that acting like a fool makes you holy, that's not the point, but that sometimes something that sounds foolish is actually wisdom. And the ultimate example would be things like blessed are the poor in spirit, it's sort of like, or blessed, these kind of things like why? Why would they be like that sounds stupid. Just like many of these ideas that if you took them at their just like top logical face value from the Gospels or something would sound just foolish. And yet there's this idea that no, they're not foolish. It's you who is foolish because you don't understand them. And I think that's often what goes on with these fools, and especially the holy fool, is that what the holy fool is saying is actually wisdom. You're foolish because you don't recognize it. So that's where the fools really become, I think, really interesting. And I think that's sort of what obviously the joke amongst all of this fool's comments is that yes, he is making jokes and saying funny things, but he's actually telling exactly what Lear should have heard. Uh, so
yeah, yeah, which is standard with them. It's his the fact he just dissolves. I think that's what I find so unsettling about his character in it and watching it. It's not even when I was reading it, it was watching it. That this
yeah,
character just he's so charismatic and smart and he just lessons and get lessons and lessons and then you don't even see him die. He just sort of
he just
is
vanishes. I'd actually have
gone.
to go back. I never really noticed it, but I think you're right. It is what happens to him.
Hmm.
I kind of
Yeah.
would be curious, yeah.
Because you have Libya actually cut these lines, but you have like have more than thou showest, speak less than thou knowest, lend less
Yeah,
than thou
that's a
owest.
good line, yeah.
Those are the great lines. Olivier cut them. I don't know. Ride more than thou
Olivier
goest.
wanted more lines for
I
himself.
know he actually cut a decent. I think the character that got the greatest percentage of his lines cut was the fool in
Cool, yeah.
Olivier's version. Um, for some weird reason, a song got cut, but like that is like that's the most wisdom in the play, and it's simple and it's straightforward and it's reiterated over and over again, but it's the wisdom Lear doesn't have, and by the end of it, he has nothing like that capacity. The fool, I think maybe I'm wrong. I should go back over and look at like
I
him
would be curious.
later
That's what
act
I'm saying. I
three.
was like, huh, I think you might have something
Yeah,
to go on there. I would be curious to see. Like, is it that the fool can function in the court because there's order and structure, and so the fool is necessary because the fool points out the absurdity of the order and the structure. But as order and structure breaks down and you just go back to nature, the fool doesn't make any sense anymore. Like then the fool is just a fool. He has no purpose and he just dissolves into the heath. Like is that the sense that's going on, I wonder? I don't know. I think you can come with a lot of ideas, but
yeah, yeah, maybe. And Lear takes on some of those characteristics as well. But maybe that's it. Yeah, maybe there's this sort of idea of like he is there to criticize stability, and once that goes away, he
I mean, a
also kind of
fool
goes
amongst
away too.
peasants is just a fool.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, he's useless. Yeah, you need a
a
fool to
fool
critique
a
power.
fool in the heath is useless.
Yeah,
And maybe that's why it's like the further he gets away from the court, the more he just melts and just becomes just a a blabbering idiot. He becomes like Tom. Um, Not you.
Yeah, no.
But
Well, occasionally me. Uh,
but I wonder if that's partially what's going on. That a fool in the Heath is useless. He's just, he's you don't need a fool to tell you the truth. The wind tells you the truth.
mhm.
The rain tells you the truth.
Yeah.
They're going to beat you down.
Mhm.
You don't need a fool. But in the court, you need a fool because you lack nature. You lack the
Mhm.
refining quality of wind and rain. So
Mhm.
you need a fool in the court.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess it's that kind of like direct access to God, right? It's
Yeah.
direct access to something
Yeah. The
tangible.
fool the fool will give you the direct access in the court. Rain and wind give you direct access to God
Right out there.
right out there. You
Yeah.
don't need a fool.
Yeah, there is something sort of what is the term for God in nature? That sort of theological concept. Pantheism?
Well, pantheism is God in everything.
Yeah, well, that's what I
So,
mean. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that kind of there seems to be something kind of pantheistic in some of Shakespeare.
Yeah. I could see that. Yeah.
I think that that
Yeah.
is a,
All God, the nature of God is present in all things.
yeah. Then you're going to encounter that, which
Well, I
I
would
think is
say, I mean,
technically
the thing is,
heathen, but
I guess I would rephrase it because, I mean, I guess it is pantheism because I'm not sure it's that God is present in all things. It's that God is present in all natural things. And the more you get away from human things into nature, like As You Like It or Midsummer or this, the further you get into nature, the closer you get to God. And the further you get into the court and man-made things and
yeah, what
the
have you.
kings and the crowns and the all
Hmm.
this kind of stuff, the further you get from God. So it's that man-made institutions and things lack God. Nature, to your point, has God. You can't escape it in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's something there in Shakespeare. There's something kind of he can't articulate it as such because I think it literally would be illegal to do so. Because it's
Yeah, yeah, no, I would agree. Yeah,
pretty heathen to say that. But there's something about his God that is in the wind, right?
yeah, you'd
And
have to, it'd be, and sure, he never read it, but it reminds me of like Ariagena. There's a sense of like Ariagena in it.
I have not read Ariagena.
It's incredibly difficult to read. But Ariagena sort of has this pantheistic sense to him, and he's writing from a similar tradition. Um, and it wouldn't surprise me. I don't think there's no chance that Shakespeare read him, but I wonder if that even if 800 years later, that thread is still running through.
Do we want to move on to the films?
Yeah, we're ridiculously over, but yeah,
I guess we'll start with the Soviet film. This was gorgeous.
it's beautiful. It's a
It's
really good movie.
beautiful. It is filmed. I was looking it up. It's filmed in what is present day Estonia. So it's in
It's
Narva.
way up there.
Yeah, and Ivan Gorod. The Ivan Gorod Fortress was the fortress and that was used as the site of the battle scene.
Just
And
I mean, it must be on the North Sea. Like, where is that? What's
it's
up
no,
there?
it's on the border of Russia and Estonia, the
Oh,
present
okay,
border.
okay. Because I'm like,
So
there's
it's
nothing up there.
yeah, it looks like there's nothing up there on the film, but it is. I think that the two things that jump out with this are, it is beautiful looking. There's overexposure he uses in it where things just seem suddenly so white, and the landscape is pretty incredible. The other thing is the soundtrack is
It's
pretty
really good, yeah.
wonderful, yeah, and it's Shostakovich who did the soundtrack.
Hmm.
So that makes sense why it's unique, but it seems to touch on a lot of kind of traditional Russian music, while also breaking free of that and doing its own thing. It has some kind of strong leitmotifs in it, especially the whistle theme that the Fool plays.
Hmm.
It's really, really just a good looking movie, and it's
It's a
like
beautiful movie. It's
it's
it's a
beautiful.
really, really. I didn't. It's one of those times where I was like, yeah, let's do a Russian one. Sure, we did Japanese, so we'll throw a Russian one in there. I'm like, oh, that's good.
Mhm.
That is a good movie.
Yeah. and stunningly well blocked. I think
Yeah.
almost every composition in it is picturesque in how it looks. And even the sound design outside of the music, the kind of diegetic sounds in it are also really kind of astounding. Like nothing sounds like it's happening right there. It
Yeah,
almost seems
it all has that sort of
filtered through like like through a box or through a material of some sort. The whole thing, it just feels weird and dissociating. And I think the thing you mentioned before is the presence of the peasants everywhere. Like Lear is pretty empty when he goes out into the world. This is just populated with people moving from place to
yeah.
place. People are just everywhere in this world, and their town is being burnt down, or they're being shoveled into this like poorhouse where they just lie on top of each other. It's a they become like stones in this world. It's really it, beautiful to look at it and sort of damaging though to see these people like this.
Yeah, this is why I think there's some commentary being made about the pettiness of his problems compared to their problems, but that you actually get to see. But I think he rises above it. I think he sort of raises the tragedy level. But I think that's what's going on. Is but it does feel like why his problems are worthless. Look at these people. Look at these
Yeah,
people. Look what's going on with them. Look at what
he
they're
couldn't
living in.
have 100 nights.
Yeah, and it's like look at these people. Look what is going on with them. It's horrible.
Mhm.
And I think that's at least
It's
some
good.
of the commentary that's going on.
Yeah, it's surprisingly loyal. It is
Yeah.
very, very loyal. The fool lives. That's as we mentioned before. That's a difference.
I
But
think he barely lives.
yeah,
I don't know. I
yeah.
don't know if you'd count it. Again, I think there is this he feels like a child abandoned in the street. That's why I feel like you're just like it's like just a child's parents died and they left him by a railroad track. Like there's just that's why I just feel like his tragedy feels so much worse because he just feels like he's just completely desolate and
This
alone.
time, yeah, yeah.
It's a very good movie.
It's a very good movie. Advisor. Do you want to jump into Olivier?
Yeah, that was also pretty darn good.
Yeah, it's really, really good. It's pretty loyal for the most part. It seems just to have cuts for time. And he is fantastic
It's
in
I think
this.
it's his best role. I think it's the
Yeah.
best thing I've ever seen him. And having now how many of Olivier's we've watched him from Henry V through Richard,
Richard, Hamlet,
Hamlet, yes,
Othello.
Othello, and this. We've seen him through a lot, and I
Mm,
think this is his best.
yeah.
Um, it's really weird watching him in Henry V in like 1943, and then this 40 years later, and being like, my God, it's like we watched this man die. Like it really has this like
Mhm.
there is a sense that you're really seeing this man at the end of his life.
He didn't live much longer than
No,
this, I
I don't
don't
think he
think.
did.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I used to say, you know that when I would talk about Branagh, and I'd be like, yeah, you know, your career is at a bad point when everyone's just waiting for you to be old enough to play Lear,
Mhm.
and then apparently he did it, and he didn't do very well with it.
He wanted to do a breezy version of Lear. And also, Branagh just doesn't look like even now. We've seen Branagh in
Branagh needs to. Well, I'm
Oppenheimer,
sure Branagh's had work done. I don't think he's.
but he also like he looks hardy, right? He
Yeah,
doesn't look like Olivier in this. And I think
you
part of it is his performance. He looks frail.
looks frail, and it's like having now. I mean, I used to always love Branagh, and now I'm sort of, he was like, I love Branagh. Branagh's the Shakespeare actor I want to see, and I'm like, Olivier's better. Like it's just the breadth that and I do really love Branagh. And it's not to say that Branagh's static, but it's sort of like you can see his Hamlet in his Henry V, and you can see his Benedict in his Hamlet and his Henry. You can sort of see his roles throughout them. This man feels like a radically different actor than any of the other things you've seen him in. Like Richard III does not feel like it's the same actor playing this Lear. And it does not feel like the same one that played Henry V or Othello or any of these roles. This feels like a radically different actor, right? I mean, do you
Yeah,
disagree?
yeah, he's unrecognizable.
He's unrecognizable
Like
in all of these.
yeah,
He's unrecognizable.
each performance seems like a completely different person. Like
And I mean,
Rich,
the Othello one is just that has its own reasons, but
yeah, but
but
even though
the
the mannerisms in Othello
yeah, it's
are
totally different.
it's totally different. His way of like moving his arm in Othello is different. His voice placement is
His
different.
voice is totally different. But even like the Richard III one, just the way that character moves and the voice of that character, it's radically different from these other ones. I mean, this is a man. This is an actor. This is the like, why don't you try acting? This is where I'm like, oh, I get what he means
Oh yeah.
because these are not. This isn't the like, I'm going to inhabit the character and you do this. It's just like this is a different thing. This is this is just wildly different.
Yeah, he's playing more.
Yeah,
He's playing with these roles. He's coming up with like a person he can be. And it just seems like there's so much more fun that
yeah.
goes on in kind of inventing these characters. I know there's on Criterion there's an interview with him and Dick Cavett back in the day when Dick Cavett was considered the most
Who
sophisticated
was
talk.
Dick Cavett?
Dick Cavett was a talk show host in the 70s who interviewed people who wouldn't get interviewed would
Oh,
interview with him. That type of
really?
thing. I'd love to watch that just because like what is this guy actually like? Like if you had lunch with Laurence Olivier,
Yeah, I have
what would
no
he
idea. Like,
yeah.
I think I have a reasonably good idea of what Branagh is like, having seen Henry V and Midsummer
Hamlet and
and
everything.
Hamlet, and I did see the Harry Potter movie. You know, I think those are stupid, but I did see my, it's not the movies per se. Actually, the movies are kind of fun. It's the books. But Branagh, I feel like you've got a reasonably good idea of what Branagh's like. I mean, even having seen his weird cameo in Oppenheimer, like I think I've got a good idea of what Branagh's like. But I don't have a clue what Olivier's
Yeah,
like.
what he actually was as a
I don't have a
human.
clue.
Mhm,
I thought I got him when I saw Henry V, and then I'm
mhm,
like, oh, he's kind of and I'm like, nope,
mhm.
he's not that at all. Because you see Richard, and I thought, oh, I think I got him, and then you see, oh, nope, don't got him at all. That man is a chameleon. Like
Yeah,
that man is a really, really good actor. And then this at the end of his life is just like, man,
yeah.
that man was something.
You also don't lose any of the pathos.
No,
It's not like he's putting a thing on and therefore you lose the emotion. The
no,
what
it's
you're
pretty
talking,
devastating. It's pretty his voice even just has this like piping quality. Like it's really sad. It's really sad.
yeah, it's high, it's unsteady.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely the last thing we saw him in was Othello, and it's an apparently
This
it was
is
an octave below his normal speaking voice is what
yeah.
his training was. This is yeah, what's this like 2 octaves higher, an
It's like
octave and a half?
so high, and it's
Yeah.
just this. It's piping, and it's just it's not that. I mean, it is the quality, but it's like Othello's in his chest. This is
Mhm.
like very cheek nasal, sort of just like way that he's projecting it. But it's a totally different person.
Mhm.
It's a really wild performance, and
Mhm.
it's I know he's older, but he's not that much older. 20 years,
20 years, yeah.
but that's not. I mean, that's not that
Less.
much time.
No.
Um. And it's a wildly different character. It's a wildly different performance. It's really something. I think it's his best. It feels his most grounded to some extent because
Mhm.
Othello is all over the place and this kind of stuff. This just feels like his most when he does his sort of Olivier expulsions. And he does those sort of things, they fit very well with this character because this just feels like a character who's just like, I'm old. I don't care what you say or think. I'm going to respond this way. And
Mhm.
that sort of just feels right.
Mhm.
It's really fun. It's a
Yeah.
really, really good production. And the thing is the others are good too.
Yeah.
They all hold their weight.
Mhm.
There's not like the Edmund in this is pretty good. I liked Edmund in this.
Yeah.
Um, I don't. Gloucester always, I guess it's just something about like the guy who loses his eyes. He just sort of gets a little bit of a pass,
I
like,
like the Gloucester though. He
but
had
I
a
thought
really
he was
good.
good here. I
I
thought he was
actually
good.
thought for a while he might have been the guy from Indiana Jones, who Gimli,
Oh, John Rhys
John
Davies.
Reeve Davies. Yeah, because I heard the voice. I'm like, I know it's not him because he's not in the credits.
The
But
king
boy,
of
it does
no,
sound
the
like him.
the one who's not the king of France, the
Oh, Brian
other one,
Cox,
Brian
Burgundy.
Cox, yeah.
Yeah,
Because I actually, again, I try not to look things up during the movies,
Mhm.
but I'm like, who is
Yeah,
that? And
it's
I'm like,
Brian Cox.
oh, he's the dude from X-Men.
Mhm.
Um,
Hannibal Lecter. He was the original Hannibal Lecter.
oh, was he? I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a Hannibal
The
Lecter
Red Dragon is the
movie.
Red Dragon one.
Yeah, it was called Manhunter in the
Oh, I thought it was called Red
1980s.
Dragon. I was called
It's
Mindhunter.
the
Okay.
book is called Red Dragon. It was made into a movie called
Okay.
Manhunter, and then it was later remade into a movie called Red Dragon.
Yeah, that was a really bad movie. That was the one with Philip Seymour Hoffman in a wheelchair, wasn't it? This thing.
No, that was
I think
Gary Oldman in a
that,
wheelchair, and that was called.
didn't Philip
Um,
Seymour Hoffman die in that movie though? Philip Seymour Hoffman, I thought, died in Red Dragon.
he might have, but the guy in the maybe he was in a wheelchair, but the guy in
I
the
thought he was in a
wheelchair
wheelchair.
was in the second film, and that was called Hannibal, and that was Gary Oldman.
I didn't see that movie though, so
That
I thought
movie
I
was
thought
bad. They
I
were
could
both
have sworn
bad.
I could have sworn
Maybe it's
that
I don't remember it. Like I remember Hannibal because it was so bad you sort of can't let it go. Red Dragon was unmemorable.
I mean, but I could have sworn the dude. I mean, it was really bad, but I could have sworn the dude was in a wheelchair or something. But again, it was bad.
The villain in Hannibal is Gary Oldman in a wheelchair. But
Oh, so maybe I never saw the movie, but maybe I'm just mixing them up.
yeah. But
Anyway,
anyway, yeah, Diane Rigg is also
we got we got we
lovely.
got distra
We
we
got
got
distracted by
distracted.
Hannibal Lecter. Brian Cox will do that too.
So anyway, but they all hold their own. Like actually, I think the sisters hold their own. They're still kind of interchangeable, but I thought they were a lot better than they are in most other productions of it.
Yeah, I
Um,
love Diane Rigg.
who's she?
She played Regan. She was also Helena in the Midsummer we saw.
Oh, in the 70s version,
Yeah.
the one with a lot of nudity.
Yes. Yeah. With
Oh,
Helen Mirren
interesting.
and Judi
Yeah, yeah,
Dench.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
she's also in Game
interesting.
of Thrones, right? She's the lady who like poisons.
Oh, she's the old lady.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I like
Yeah.
her.
She's
I don't like Game of Thrones, but I like that.
yeah. She's really pretty in in the 60s and
I mean,
70s.
honestly, she's pretty as an old lady. She's like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Oh, interesting. Oh, I didn't recognize her, but yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, she's
Um,
great in it too.
but they're great. Like, Cordelia is pretty kind of weak, but again, there's not much to do there.
Yeah, I
Um,
found Edgar a little annoying. It's
he's not very good. Again, he's
yeah.
kind of a boring role. Like, what are you gonna do with that dude?
I mean, he has mad scenes. There's things you can do with it. He's
I
just
guess
he,
that's true.
yeah. It's just at the end he kind of comes off as a little self-righteous, I suppose.
Well,
Um,
I mean, he went through a lot.
yeah,
He had a rough time. His dad died.
he became an insane bum for a little while.
I do love because I mean I mean again I've only seen it on the stage once and I mean again it's hard to play it not for laughs and they kind of did it in the movie is when Gloucester goes to kill himself and just goes like
Boom.
it
Mhm.
just falls on the ground. And it's hard to not play that moment for laughs and I couldn't quite tell if the movie wanted me to laugh but it was so ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah.
But it that moment worked.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything in there where I mean, I guess I didn't really care about Edgar. There's so many other good things, so I didn't
Mhm.
really notice. But
Notice, yeah, yeah, and I like the Stonehenge set.
oh yeah, that was cool.
That
Yeah,
was a yeah, clever little nod to the like old source material, the
yeah, the
Holland's
pre,
Head
yeah, yeah.
thing that this was supposed to be. And I think that makes sense in the themes of the thing as well, that kind of idea of this kind of natural energy that's going on there. But yeah, it's a great we should have more film stage plays of our great actors because I would love that if they
Well,
filmed
that's
the
yeah.
Branagh Lear. I know it's probably not very good, the Branagh Lear,
We
but
need more of those because
yeah.
and especially with Shakespeare. I mean, I like Henry V and I like many of these things, but the reason I think Hamlet that Branagh's Hamlet works is because it feels not quite like a staged play, but it doesn't feel like a movie.
Mhm.
And I don't, Shakespeare feels very Brechtian in the sense that like it's very much a thing that's tied to the stage. And when you try to blow them up into these naturalistic things, they don't always work.
Mhm.
Whereas filmed versions tend to work better. It's why I still love that Iceman cometh with, the with, well, gosh,
We always forget his
we
name.
always forget his name. Um, Again, 2 Academy Awards and still can't remember his name.
Jason
Um,
Robards.
Jason Robards.
Mm.
But I love that Jason Robards
Mm.
uh version. Like I think that's just so good. I really want to watch it sometime soon.
Yeah.
Well, if we do the Nobel Prize ones, we'll have that one. That
We could
that
do it.
that
We have an excuse. Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably gonna watch it before that because God knows we can't. When are we gonna get to the 30s? I do love that movie. Like, I just think that's such a good movie, and I think staged version of plays is an underrated genre, especially with Shakespeare.
Because yeah, the what you're documenting is the performances. You're
Yeah,
not really documenting the visual experience of it in terms of what a movie normally does. So it is less less intriguing, I think, than actually being there or there actually being a film version. But it's
yeah,
necessary because you get things like Olivier's Lear or Robarts's Hickey or
yeah,
anything like that, which is really the point of doing things like that. And fortunately, like I know the Lincoln's Theater Library has a huge collection of these stage performances. Like if you could go in there at Lincoln Theater and see these
Is this
things.
Lincoln Center or is
Lincoln
this
Center,
Lincoln?
excuse me, the theater at Lincoln
Okay,
Center.
I just didn't know if there was a difference. I didn't know if it was.
Oh yeah, no. I should have just said Lincoln Center. The
That's fine. I
theater
just didn't know
there,
if there was a
yeah.
Lincoln Theater. I'm like, oh, is
They
that
have
one of the theaters
everything.
on Broadway?
They have a tremendously large film collection of like as many film theater things as they could get together. And so it's a really useful resource. I think even bad Shakespeare, if you can film even bad Shakespeare, if it's done by professionals, that is, and put it up there, even that's useful for just getting it. And I think you're right. There is a Brechtian quality to Shakespeare that
Yeah.
it just requires that type of interaction. Any other thoughts we have before we should outro?
No, I'm good. Unless we want to talk for 45 minutes about it. We talk for 45 minutes about the word Lear.
Where does it come from? If you enjoyed King Lear, check out these adaptations. We have a 1910 Italian silent historical drama. That looks very fun and has been colorized, so you're lucky to get that there. There's a 1916 one. There's a 1953 one starring Orson Welles as Lear, which
God, he didn't, he lacked perspective.
yeah. There is also the 1971 Peter Brook version starring Paul Scofield as Lear, which is a fairly famous film adaptation. We have Jean-Luc Godard's Lear from 1987. We also have the Lear from 1999 starring Brian Blessed as Lear.
Oh, I
So
really like him.
check that out. I really like Brian Blessed as well. We're big fans here. We have a Trevor Nunn film version of Lear
No, I don't
starring,
like him.
well, it's starring Ian McClellan, so it might be worth checking out. We have our 2015 Stratford Lear and the 2018 Anthony Hopkins Lear.
Someone needs to do it like a version like, 10 Things I Hate About You or She's the Man. Someone needs to do a teen version of this.
Yeah, so
This would
please,
this would
if you can find a
this would this
teen version of
translate
Lear,
very well to high school.
but I will leave us on the 1985 Ron, Kurosawa's very famous version of King Lear. People love it. I'm less intrigued, but whatever. Go for it. You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content,
and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapt It, wherever fine podcasts are found.
Join us next time when we discuss The Tempest, including Julie Taymor's 2010 version starring Helen Mirren, Peter Greenaway's Prospero's Book from 1991, and Forbidden Planet from 1956. See you then.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week we'll be discussing The Tempest. Pat, if you could play one role in this play, what would it be?
I mean, probably Prospero, but I wouldn't be Prospero. I'm not old enough to be Prospero. I'm not young enough to play any of the other guys. I don't know. Caliban, Ariel. I don't really know. I don't think I'd want to be. I don't think I'd want to be in this play. I think I would be a disaster in this play.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's no role that would be good for me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just think this is a weird play, and I don't think I would just. I think I just would be like, I'm sitting this one out, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. I don't, like, part of me just says Caliban because there, I probably can do like a monstrous thing
Yeah, that's
pretty
what I'm like,
well, but considering modern assumptions about Caliban, that might not be exactly the role I would be suited for. It's also not quite like I think I'd probably come off too patrician for Caliban anyway. I'm not old enough for
that's why like
Prospero.
Ariel could be good. You could do Ariel.
Ariel's
I don't
so
know. Ariel's, I guess, a
fey,
little boyish.
though.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
Ariel's a little boyish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I almost see like a woman could play Ariel and has
Yeah.
probably pretty successfully. Like in all the productions we saw, that it's always like a little guy or literally a child in one of them. Um,
No, that's a
maybe
valid point. I don't
like
even know. That's the thing is like I can't play Angelo. I think I wouldn't be very good as the drunk, like Trincolo. I don't think I'd be good as any of them. They're too clownish. They're too buffoonish. Like I wouldn't be good as those roles.
yeah, I don't think I'd be good in the Stefano Trincolo thing either. Maybe, but even there, like Sebastian or
You could play
Antonio,
you could play maybe like the King of Naples or
the King
whatever
of
he is.
Naples, yeah,
Which one he is.
Alonso.
Yeah, you could play
Um,
Alonso.
yeah,
He doesn't
he
do
doesn't
very
do
much.
anything. He just
It's a very
mostly freezes in place until
it's
he's
like he
forgiven.
doesn't, yeah, and then he just mopes about his son. So
Yeah,
you could maybe play him, but that's like not a good role. Like
yeah,
this play has good roles, just not good roles that either of us could play.
yeah. Probably you would have been a good what's his name, Ferdinand?
When I was probably younger, but not
Yeah,
now.
no, not now. I mean, because Ferdinand has to. God, he should be a teenager since his bride to be's 15
Yeah,
in
so
this
it's
play. It would be it'd be real creepy if you did it now.
that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't really think about the fact that she's supposed to be 15. I didn't
Yeah,
think about that.
yeah, but no, I think we're aged oddly for this play.
Yeah, this is not a
So
good
I
play for us.
don't think it's good. And it kind of speaks, I think, what we're going to talk about next week, which is this is a weird play.
It's a very weird play.
It's a
Yeah,
weird one. I don't know really what to
that's why we're
make of
doing it
it.
last. I guess we'll
Well, we'll have a closeout
We'll have a closeout
with the profoundly bad play.
play with a profoundly bad play. But this is the last play that we're doing that's actually a good play.